The total on my screen jumped again. 15,000, then 16, then 17. And that was the exact moment I understood that something in my life had quietly, irreversibly cracked. My name is Elena Whitmore, and I was 29 years old when I realized something was very wrong. I wasn't in the middle of an argument or a dramatic confrontation. I was standing in line at a grocery store holding a small plastic basket with instant noodles and eggs, doing the kind of mental math you do when you're trying not to overdraft. My phone vibrated once in my hand, then again, then a third time. 3 alerts from my credit card app, all within 30 seconds. Pending charges, foreign currency, cities I had never been to and couldn't afford to even Google without stress. By the time I stepped outside and sat in my car with the engine off my phone glowing in my lap, the number had climbed to just under $18,000. I didn't scream or cry. I just stared at the screen, waiting for it to blink and say this was some kind of mistake. For most of my life, I had played a very specific role in my family. I wasn't the successful one or the impressive one. I was the reliable one. The background character who paid her bills, showed up on time, and didn't rock the boat. I had been independent since I was 18, working my way through school, living in apartments I could actually afford, and building my life carefully because I had to. There was no safety net for me. If I messed up, it was on me. My younger sister, Erica, had grown up in a completely different version of that same family. She was 24 now, and if I had to describe her role, it would be the center of gravity. Everything bent toward her, her moods, her plans, her problems. If something went wrong in Erica's life, it became a family emergency. If something went wrong in mine, it was framed as a lesson I was supposed to learn quietly. That dynamic had been there for as long as I could remember. Erica forgot her homework in high school, and my parents drove it to school. I forgot my lunch money and was told I would survive. Erica dropped out of college twice, and they blamed the professors. I took on extra shifts to cover rent after a roommate bailed, and that was called adulthood. So when I saw those charges, my first reaction wasn't anger. It was confusion, followed by a very specific cold feeling settling in my stomach. The charges were for airline tickets, international round-trip hotels in Paris, Rome, and Barcelona, train passes, tour packages. With every refresh, the total climbed higher. My credit card limit wasn't even that high, which meant something else had happened. Someone had requested temporary increases. Someone had planned this. The booking confirmations weren't under my name. They were under Erica's. My parents' email address was listed as the contact. I drove home in a fog, every red light feeling longer than usual as my mind cycled through the same questions. How did they get my card details? Why didn't anyone ask me? How long had this been planned? Beneath all of that, though, was a quieter thought that hurt more than the rest. Of course it was them. Of course it was for her. When I got home, I didn't unpack the groceries or eat. I sat at my kitchen table and pulled up my bank statements, emails, and credit report. That's when I noticed the smaller details, a test charge from a travel site 2 weeks earlier that I'd missed because it was only a few dollars, and a notification about a credit limit increase approved 3 days ago, one I hadn't requested or even seen. Then it clicked. A year earlier, my mom had asked for my credit card details just in case. She said it was for emergencies, like if something happened and they needed to book a flight quickly. I hesitated, but she framed it the way she always did, half joking and half wounded, reminding me that they had raised me and asking why I didn't trust them. I gave her the details with one condition: never use it without asking me. She laughed and said she wouldn't dream of it. Apparently she had. I called my parents' house. My dad answered cheerfully, like it was a relaxed afternoon and not the day my financial stability cracked in half. I asked him calmly if they had used my credit card. There was a pause, not confused or surprised, but calculating. "Oh," he said finally, "that must be the travel bookings." "What travel bookings?" I asked. "For Erica." My mom's voice cut in from the background as she walked closer to the phone. She said it was Erica's graduation gift, well, a delayed graduation gift, and reminded me how hard things had been for her. Hard for her. That phrase again. I asked why my card was used. There was another pause, longer this time. My mom finally said that I had good credit and that I was responsible and they knew it wouldn't be an issue. I remember gripping the edge of the table so tightly my fingers hurt. I asked why no one had told me, and she said they were going to, but they didn't want to stress me out before everything was finalized. I laughed once short and sharp before I could stop myself and asked how they planned to pay it back. My mom sighed like I was being dramatic and said they would figure it out, adding that I didn't need the money right now because I was always so careful. That was the moment something shifted inside me, not explosively, but quietly, like a door closing. I told them I needed time to think and hung up. Within minutes, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Erica. She didn't say thank you. She sent a screenshot of her itinerary first-class seats circled in red with a caption underneath Europe baby. I stared at the screen for a long time, at the confidence, the assumption, and the complete absence of concern that this was my name on the debt and my credit on the line. That night, I barely slept. By morning, the charges were no longer pending. They were posted. That was when I realized that if I did nothing, I would once again become the quiet accomplice to my own undoing. And that was when I made the call that changed everything. I made the call the next morning, sitting at the same kitchen table where I had spent most of the night, staring at the wall, listening to my own thoughts circle each other like exhausted birds. By then, the charges were no longer pending. They were finalized, sitting on my account like a weight I hadn't agreed to carry. My hands were steady when I tapped the number on the back of my credit card, which unsettled me more than panic would have. The representative answered in a practiced, upbeat tone and asked how she could help. I took a breath, glanced once more at the total, and told her I needed to report several charges I had not authorized. She asked me to confirm the transactions, and as I read them out, one by one, my phone vibrated on the table beside me. A message from my mother lit up the screen. I didn't open it. I kept my voice even, answering questions as they came, confirming dates, locations, and amounts. When the representative asked if anyone else had access to my card details, I hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I knew what acknowledging it would mean. I told her yes, a family member. She asked if I had given permission for this specific use. I said no. She explained that the account would be temporarily frozen while they investigated and outlined the next steps, the forms I would need to complete the timeline. I thanked her and ended the call. The moment I set my phone down, it started buzzing again. Missed calls stacked up almost instantly, my parents' names alternating across the screen, followed by Erica's. A group chat we hadn't used in years suddenly came back to life. I didn't respond. I just sat there feeling like I had stepped off something tall and was still waiting to hit the ground. The first message I opened was from my mother. What did you do? No greeting. No concern, just that. My father's followed seconds later, telling me to call him immediately because this was not okay. Then Erica messaged, sounding irritated rather than worried, saying the airline had emailed her and something was wrong with the tickets. She told me to fix it as if I had accidentally unplugged the Wi-Fi. I typed a short response to my parents saying we would talk later and put my phone face down. I went to work and somehow got through the morning answering emails and staring at spreadsheets while my personal life quietly detonated in my pocket. By lunchtime, my manager pulled me aside and asked if everything was all right because I looked distracted. I told him I hadn't slept well, which was true enough to pass as an explanation. When I got home that evening, my parents were already there. They hadn't knocked. They had used the spare key I'd given them years ago, back when I still believed boundaries were rude. I opened my apartment door to find my mom pacing the living room and my dad standing near the window, with his arms crossed, his jaw set. Erica wasn't there, which I noticed immediately. She rarely handled confrontation directly, if she could let our parents do it for her. My mom started talking the second she saw me, demanding to know what I had been thinking and whether I understood what I'd done. I set my bag down slowly and asked them to sit, but neither of them did. My dad stepped forward and said the bank had called, that the charges were being investigated as fraud, and that they had been asked questions. He emphasized my name as if that alone should have stopped me. I told him evenly that it was my card, so of course they had asked me questions too. My mom threw her hands up and said they had told me they would pay it back. I asked when. She opened her mouth and then closed it, redirecting instead to say that wasn't the point. I told her it was exactly the point. That was when the tone in the room shifted. The concern drained out of it, and something colder took its place. My dad said I didn't have to take it this far and that I could have talked to them. I reminded him that I had talked to them and that they had told me it wasn't a big deal. My mom shook her head like I was being stubborn and said they had raised me better than this, reporting my own family over money. Something snapped then, not loudly but finally. I told her it wasn't about money. It was about trust and permission, about the fact that they had planned an entire international trip using my credit without so much as a text. My mom shot back that it was for Erica, not strangers, as if that explained everything. I asked them if they would have done the same thing to Erica's credit card for me. Neither of them answered. Instead, my dad accused me of always keeping score. That hurt more than I expected because in their minds, this hadn't been theft. It had been redistribution. I had something. Erica wanted something. They had simply moved resources around. My mom stepped closer and lowered her voice the way she used to when she wanted me to feel guilty, and said I was independent and strong, and they hadn't thought I would mind helping my sister. I told her that helping implied a choice. She sighed and said I was being dramatic, that this was going to ruin things for Erica. The trip was in 2 weeks, she said, and Erica had already told people. She had been looking forward to it for months. That word echoed in my head, months of planning, months where no one thought to mention that my financial future was being leveraged behind my back. My dad said I needed to call the bank back and clear it up. When I asked what that would look like, he told me to say it was a misunderstanding, that I had given permission. I stared at him and asked if he was telling me to lie. He shrugged and said he preferred to call it protecting the family. I asked what protecting me looked like in this situation, and that was when my mom said something so casually cruel it took a moment to land. She said I didn't need protecting, that I was fine, and that Erica needed this more than I did. There it was finally said out loud. I told them I wasn't reversing anything. My dad's face flushed, and he warned me that if the bank escalated the situation, there could be legal consequences. He said my mom was beside herself and that Erica was devastated, as if any of that outweighed what they had done. When they realized I wasn't backing down, the guilt sharpened. My mom accused me of tearing the family apart. My dad accused me of being vindictive. They warned me that holidays would be awkward now and that relatives would hear about this, that I was embarrassing them. I asked why embarrassment mattered more than accountability. They didn't answer. Before they left, my dad said that if this went any further, I shouldn't expect them to help me in the future. I almost laughed. I had never asked them for financial help in my life, but the message was clear. Fall in line, or you're on your own. After they left, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying everything they had said and everything they hadn't. The way my money was treated like a shared resource, the way Erica hadn't even shown up, the way none of them seemed to grasp that what they had done was wrong. The next day, Erica finally called me herself, not to apologize, but to ask why I was doing this. She said Mom told her I was trying to cancel her trip. I told her I had reported unauthorized charges. She scoffed and said it wasn't unauthorized if we were family. I asked her if she had asked before booking it. She hesitated and then said she didn't think she had to. That assumption, that entitlement, landed heavier than any insult. I told her the investigation was out of my hands now. She grew quiet and then angry, accusing me of being jealous and resentful, saying I couldn't stand seeing her enjoy things. I told her that wasn't true, that what I resented was being used. She hung up on me. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. Relatives started texting, asking what was going on. An aunt said my mom was crying nonstop. A cousin hinted that I should be the bigger person. My parents sent long messages that alternated between apologies that weren't really apologies and subtle warnings about family fallout. Then an email arrived from the credit card company requesting additional documentation and a formal statement. It also mentioned that due to the amount involved and the international nature of the charges, the case might be escalated beyond an internal review. I read that sentence 3 times, feeling the weight of it settle in. That night, my mom came by again alone this time. She sat at my table and finally said the quiet part out loud. If I didn't fix this, she said, Erica could get in real trouble. She asked if that was what I wanted, to ruin my sister's life over a credit card. I looked at her and realized she truly believed the harm only flowed in one direction. After she left, my phone buzzed with another message, this one from Erica. She said Mom told her that if I didn't stop this, she was going to tell people everything about me. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, wondering what everything meant, and understood that whatever they were planning next wouldn't be subtle. The next few weeks were some of the quietest and loudest of my life at the same time. On the surface, nothing looked different. I went to work, paid my bills, answered emails, and nodded politely in meetings. Inside, though, my thoughts never stopped. They circled constantly, replaying conversations that had already happened and rehearsing ones that hadn't. I had always believed that silence meant peace, but I was learning that silence could also be a form of pressure. After my mom's last visit, I stopped responding to family messages altogether. not out of spite, but because every interaction left me feeling hollowed out, like I had handed over another piece of myself for inspection and judgment. I muted the group chats. I stopped answering calls. When my aunt reached out to ask what was really going on, I told her politely that I needed space and wouldn't be discussing it further. She still sent long paragraphs afterward, but at least I didn't read them anymore. The bank investigation moved slowly and methodically, like a machine that didn't care about family dynamics or guilt trips. They asked for written statements, and I provided them. They asked for timelines, and I laid everything out clearly: dates, messages, screenshots, and confirmations. Turning my family life into bullet points and attachments felt surreal, but there was also something unexpectedly grounding about it. For the first time, I wasn't trying to soften the truth or frame it in a way that made everyone else look better. I was just stating facts. Still, the emotional cost caught up with me. I stopped sleeping properly, waking up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, my mind already running through worst-case scenarios. I worried about my credit, my job, and my reputation. I wondered if this would follow me for years, if I had actually gone too far, like they said. There were moments when I sat on my couch with my phone in my hand, hovering over my mom's contact, thinking that maybe I should just fix it. Maybe I should call the bank and say it was a misunderstanding, swallow the debt, and move on like I always had before. Every time I came close to doing that, one sentence stopped me cold. You don't need protecting. Erica needs this more than you do. That sentence became an anchor, not in a comforting way, but in a grounding one. It reminded me exactly why I was here. Work didn't offer much refuge at first. I was tired and distracted, running on caffeine and adrenaline. One afternoon, I made a small mistake on a report. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was noticeable. My manager asked me to stay late to fix it, and as I sat alone in the office after everyone else had gone home, staring at numbers that refused to make sense, something in me finally gave way. I put my head in my hands and just sat there. That was the lowest point, not because of the money or the investigation, but because I finally admitted to myself how exhausted I was, not just from this situation, but from a lifetime of being the one who absorbed impact so others didn't have to, the one who was fine, the one who didn't complain, the one who could handle it. I realized I didn't actually know what it felt like to be taken care of or even considered. That night, instead of spiraling, I did something small but deliberate. I opened my laptop and started a new document titled What I Control. It wasn't inspirational or dramatic. It was practical. I listed the things I could influence: my finances, my boundaries, my career, my living situation, my mental health. Then I listed the things I couldn't: my parents' reactions. Erica's entitlement, extended family opinions, and the final outcome of the investigation. Seeing it laid out that way shifted something inside me. I started tightening my finances immediately. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus. I changed every password I could think of. I removed my parents' access to anything financial, including emergency contacts and old backups I had never bothered updating. I felt strangely calm while doing it, like I was locking doors that should have been locked years ago. I also booked a few sessions with a therapist. That decision took more effort than I expected, mostly because part of me still believed I didn't deserve that kind of support. But once I started talking, things poured out. The favoritism, the resentment I had never allowed myself to name, the guilt that followed every act of self-preservation. She didn't tell me I was right or wrong. She helped me see patterns, how often my needs had been minimized, how conditioned I was to equate love with obligation. Slowly, very slowly, I began to feel steadier. The bank sent another update saying the investigation was ongoing and the charges were still under dispute. No final determination yet. I forwarded the email to a folder and stopped checking it obsessively. I decided I would deal with updates when they came, not hunt for them every hour. Around that time, something unexpected happened at work. My manager called me into his office and my stomach dropped out of habit. Old instincts kicked in, bracing for bad news. Instead, he told me about a new project that was opening up, one that needed someone detail-oriented and reliable. He said my name had come up, that he trusted me. It wasn't a promotion, not yet, but it was visibility, and it felt like validation that had nothing to do with my family or what I could provide for them. I took it. Having something concrete to focus on helped anchor me when everything else felt uncertain. I stayed late because I wanted to, not because I was cleaning up someone else's mess. For the first time in weeks, I felt competent again. The silence from my family grew heavier. My mom stopped texting altogether. My dad sent one short message saying I was being unreasonable and that they were disappointed. Erica blocked me on social media. I later found out through a mutual friend that she had been telling people I tried to sabotage her out of jealousy, that I was unstable and had always had issues. Strangely, that hurt less than I expected. It fit the pattern too perfectly to be surprising. What did hurt was realizing how conditional their love had been, how quickly it evaporated once I stopped being useful. There was relief in that realization, too painful relief, but relief nonetheless. I stopped wondering if I was imagining things. I stopped gaslighting myself. Then, one afternoon, while I was at work, my phone buzzed with a notification that made my chest tighten. An email from the bank. The subject line read, "Fraud Investigation Update. Immediate attention required." I didn't open it right away. I finished what I was doing, closed my laptop, and took a deep breath, knowing that whatever was inside was going to change things again. Before I could check it, my phone buzzed a second time. This message wasn't from the bank. It was from a number I didn't recognize. The preview showed only one sentence. "This is Detective Harris. I need to speak with you regarding a financial investigation involving your family." I stared at the screen, my pulse pounding, understanding that whatever fragile balance I had found was about to be tested in ways I hadn't fully prepared for. I didn't respond to the detective's message right away, not because I was scared exactly, but because I had learned the hard way that reacting immediately was how I lost control of situations. For most of my life, I had been trained to respond, to adjust to, smooth things over before anyone else felt uncomfortable. This time, I wanted to be deliberate. I forwarded the message to my personal email, locked my phone, and finished the workday on autopilot. When I got home, I sat at the same kitchen table where all of this had started weeks earlier. The difference now was how I felt sitting there. Back then, I had felt cornered. Now I felt prepared. I called the number Detective Harris had left. He answered on the second ring, calm and professional, and confirmed my identity, before explaining that because of the amount involved and the direction the investigation was heading, law enforcement had been notified. He said they were looking into who initiated the transactions, who benefited from them, and whether there was intent. His tone was neutral, factual, as if he were describing the weather. I asked him what he needed from me. Mostly cooperation, he said, and documentation. Any communication that showed I hadn't authorized the charges. I told him I had plenty. We scheduled a meeting for the following week. After the call ended, I opened the bank email I had been avoiding. It confirmed what the detective had implied. The investigation had concluded that the charges were unauthorized. The provisional credit was now permanent, the account would remain closed, and the case had been escalated externally. In plain language, the bank believed me. I sat there for a long time after reading that, waiting for some kind of emotional release that never came. There was no rush of triumph, no sense of victory, just a deep, steady validation. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't overreacted. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was real. For the first time since everything began, I stopped thinking in terms of defense and started thinking in terms of positioning. I didn't want chaos or public meltdowns. I didn't want screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. What I wanted was simple and precise. I wanted the truth to land exactly where it belonged. Over the next few days, I became methodical. I printed everything. Bank statements, emails, text messages, screenshots of Erica's itinerary with timestamps showing when bookings were made and from which IP addresses. I organized folders, created timelines, and stripped emotion out of the narrative until only facts remained. I also started making phone calls, not confrontational ones, but informational ones. I spoke to a consumer rights advisor through a free legal clinic. I didn't ask how to punish my parents. I asked how to protect myself, what my obligations were, and what I should and shouldn't say if this escalated. I also spoke to HR at work carefully and without unnecessary detail, explaining that I was dealing with a personal legal matter that might involve phone calls during business hours. They were understanding more than understanding, actually supportive. Each small step added another layer of insulation between me and the chaos my family was generating. The silence from my parents continued. No apologies, no explanations, just absence. Through my aunt, I learned that they had told relatives a very different version of events, one where I had panicked, misunderstood, and stubbornly refused to correct an honest mistake. What they didn't realize was that their version only worked as long as I stayed quiet, and I was done staying quiet. The meeting with Detective Harris happened on a Tuesday morning. I took a half day off work and met him at a small office downtown. He was polite, direct, and thorough. He asked me to walk through everything from the beginning, and I did carefully and without embellishment. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and told me that if the case proceeded, there could be serious consequences for the people involved. He asked me what my goal was, not accusatory, just curious. I thought about it before answering. I told him I wanted to stop being treated like collateral damage. He studied me for a moment and then nodded, as if that made perfect sense. After that meeting, something shifted again. I stopped bracing myself for retaliation and started anticipating outcomes. I knew my parents well enough to know they wouldn't accept accountability quietly. If backed into a corner, they would look for leverage and pressure points. So I removed them. I changed my phone number and gave the new one only to people I trusted. I updated my address with banks and employers and removed my parents as emergency contacts everywhere. I packed up a few things they had stored at my place and dropped them off at a mutual friend's house instead of returning them directly. I also did something that felt strange but necessary. I wrote a letter, not to send, at least not yet, but to organize my own thoughts. I wrote down every instance I could remember where I had been expected to give more because I was stronger every time Erica's needs had come first. Every moment my discomfort had been reframed as selfishness. I didn't dramatize or exaggerate. I just documented. By the end, I wasn't angry. I was clear. That clarity became my biggest advantage. The first crack appeared, sooner than I expected. My dad called from an unknown number. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice was different, tighter, less authoritative. He said they had been contacted, that things were getting out of hand, that lawyers were expensive, and that I needed to think about what this would do to the family. I saved the voicemail. My mom followed with a long email, emotional and erratic, swinging between guilt and fear. She said she hadn't realized the bank would take it this far. She said Erica was stressed and that people were asking questions. She suggested that maybe we could all sit down and talk like adults. I noticed what she didn't say. She didn't apologize. Erica tried a different approach. She messaged me through a mutual friend's account, saying she felt betrayed and that sisters shouldn't do this to each other. She said I could have just asked her to pay me back. That message almost made me laugh because by then I knew something she didn't. The bookings hadn't just been flights and hotels. There were non-refundable deposits, insurance claims, and vendor contracts, the kind of details that unraveled quickly once fraud was confirmed. I didn't respond. I waited. A few evenings later, as I was making dinner, an email from Detective Harris came in. It was short and direct. They had received statements from the other parties, he said, and there were inconsistencies. They might need me present for a joint clarification. I read the email twice, then set my phone down and turned back to the stove, stirring absent-mindedly. A joint clarification meant side-by-side timelines, stories intersecting under scrutiny. It meant the version of events my family had been telling themselves was about to collide with documented reality. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about what came next, not emotionally, but strategically. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing my moment, and it was getting closer. The joint clarification was scheduled for a Thursday morning. I arrived early and waited in a quiet conference room with a glass wall that looked out onto a hallway where people passed without paying me any attention. I wasn't nervous, which surprised me. Months earlier, the thought of sitting across from my parents with authority figures present would have tied my stomach in knots. Now there was a strange calm in knowing I wasn't there to defend myself. The facts already existed. I was simply one part of the record. My parents arrived together. They looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but diminished, as if the certainty they carried through life had thinned under scrutiny. My mom avoided my eyes. My dad tried to project confidence, but his jaw tightened and loosened repeatedly, like he was rehearsing arguments he no longer trusted. Erica came in last, visibly annoyed, scrolling through her phone as if this meeting were an inconvenience rather than a reckoning. Detective Harris and a representative from the bank led the session. They laid out the timeline on a screen, clean and unemotional. Dates, times, IP addresses. The request for a credit limit increase approved within minutes. The bookings that followed shortly after. Confirmation emails sent to my parents' address. Tickets issued in Erica's name. Every piece aligned with quiet precision. They asked my parents to explain. My dad spoke first. He framed everything as a misunderstanding. Said they believed there was implied consent, that family finances had always been fluid. He insisted there was no malicious intent. The bank representative asked if there was any written authorization. There wasn't. My mom went next. She cried. She talked about stress, about wanting to do something special for her daughter, about assuming I would understand because I was capable and independent. The detective listened, took notes, and then asked a single question that cut through the emotion. Had she asked me before using the card? Silence filled the room. Erica shifted in her chair and jumped in, saying she hadn't known which card was used, that she trusted our parents to handle it, that she had already told people about the trip and didn't want to look foolish. The bank representative asked if she had benefited from the purchases. Erica answered yes, clearly irritated by the obviousness of the question. That was when I realized I barely needed to speak. Each answer created another contradiction. Their stories didn't line up, and intent became harder to deny with every explanation. Eventually, the detective turned to me and asked if I had anything to add. I took a breath and said one thing. I had never given permission verbally or in writing, and when I discovered the charges, I reported them to protect myself. That was all. No speeches, no accusations. The meeting ended shortly after. The detective explained the next steps. The case would be forwarded to the prosecutor's office. Restitution discussions would follow. Cooperation would be noted, but the facts were the facts. When my parents stood to leave, my mom finally looked at me. She didn't look angry. She looked stunned, like she was seeing a version of the world where her expectations didn't automatically reshape reality. Erica didn't look at me at all. The fallout didn't arrive in one dramatic wave. It unfolded in stages. The trip was canceled. Vendors were notified. Deposits were forfeited. Insurance claims were denied once fraud was confirmed. The money didn't reappear somewhere else. It vanished along with the fantasy they had built around it. Then came the consequences. Not dramatic courtroom scenes or handcuffs, but real lasting ones. Institutions stopped listening to family explanations and started listening to evidence. That shift changed everything. My parents were forced to confront a reality they had avoided for decades, that intent doesn't disappear just because you repeat the word family often enough. Erica faced consequences too, the kind that followed her quietly. Questions were asked. Employers asked questions. The version of herself she had been selling, unlucky, misunderstood, unfairly held back, collapsed under scrutiny. Documentation has a way of doing that. The social fallout followed. Family gatherings became awkward or stopped happening altogether. Some relatives reached out privately to apologize for pressuring me earlier. Others stayed silent. A few doubled down and said I should have handled it internally. I didn't argue. I didn't need to, because my life quietly started to get better. In the weeks after the meeting, I stopped waiting for something else to happen. For a long time, I had lived as if my life were on pause, bracing for the next call, the next confrontation, the next wave of fallout. When none came, I realized the real shift had already happened. The crisis was no longer unfolding in front of me. It was behind me, leaving consequences in its wake. The trip never happened. That much was obvious. What wasn't immediately visible were the quieter repercussions that followed. Money that had been assumed to be temporary simply vanished when vendors canceled and non-refundable deposits were forfeited. Insurance refused to cover anything tied to confirmed fraud. There was no dramatic recovery plan, no hidden solution. The fantasy collapsed under the weight of reality. Legal consequences followed not loudly but firmly. When institutions stop accepting family explanations and start relying on evidence, things move with a kind of efficiency that feels almost impersonal. My parents were forced to navigate a world where intentions didn't override actions. Erica, too, faced repercussions that reached further than she expected. Not prison, not spectacle, but something more enduring. Questions followed her. Opportunities narrowed. The narrative she had always relied on, that she was simply unlucky or misunderstood, stopped working once documentation entered the conversation. At the same time, my own life began to stabilize in ways I hadn't anticipated. My credit recovered faster than I expected. The provisional chaos that had hovered over my finances lifted, replaced by something solid again. At work, the project I had taken on quietly turned into a real promotion. A raise followed one that made future plans feel tangible instead of theoretical. I moved into a new apartment, nothing extravagant, just peaceful, a place that felt like mine. I kept going to therapy. That decision, more than anything else, changed how I understood the past. I learned how to sit with discomfort without immediately trying to fix it for someone else. I learned that boundaries didn't require explanations or apologies. I learned that being calm didn't mean being passive. Walking away, I discovered, could be an act of strength. Months later, my parents reached out again. The messages were careful, softened around the edges, framed as olive branches. They spoke about moving forward, about mistakes made, about not wanting to stay stuck in the past. What they didn't do was apologize for what they had done, not directly, not clearly. I read the messages, felt nothing dramatic, and declined. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. I understood something then that I wish I had learned earlier. You don't owe access to people who only value you when you are useful. You don't have to sacrifice your future to preserve someone else's illusion of harmony. The revenge, if it could be called that, wasn't loud. It wasn't emotional. It didn't involve shouting matches or public humiliation. It was letting the truth stand on its own and choosing myself for the first time. The world didn't collapse when I did. It expanded. The last message I ever received from my father was short. He said he hoped it had all been worth it. I never replied because the answer was already clear. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying anyone else's debt, financial or emotional. And that freedom cost me a family that never truly had my back to begin with.